right. So I have completed, well, I'm partway through the Language Matters module of the South Compass Point. Um, I'm going to talk about um, the presentation given by Mandy and then how she led us on to one of 4 or 5 other videos we could have looked at. I chose New Zealand Sign Language, the deaf students one. So I felt that Language Matters was particularly important to me as a role in my role as a teacher of the deaf, working with young children who have varying skills in language. Language plays a central role in how children learn and how they connect and how they access the world around them. And I feel because of this, the ideas talked about in Language Matters resonated with me as a teacher. In my earlier reflection or insight that I wrote about, I just talked about some of the historical injustices experienced by deaf people in education, employment, and the wider society in general. Looking back now, we look back in astonishment at the barriers that deaf people had to face, particularly children in school settings. For so many years, deaf learners were deprived and punished for their trying to use a language that they could feel comfortable with. They were deprived of access to a language and supports that would have enabled them to succeed to the same levels as their hearing peers. Mandy Mentis talked about when working with children who are acquiring a language, our central guiding question should be, what can I do to ensure that no child is left behind? And this is a powerful reminder that as educators, we need to create opportunities and hold up high expectations for our learners. It also highlights the importance of being conscious and intentional with the language we use as teachers. The words we choose can either open doors or set up barriers for our students. Language should never contribute to exclusion or discrimination. It should support inclusion and equitable access to knowledge. As educators, our role is not only to teach language, but to ensure that it becomes a tool for connection and success. There you go.
Cool. I did the same one as you. And I was interested in how we use interpreters.
Yeah.
Because when they talked about where is it now? Something about where it locates us, like the language locates us, and the connote and all of this sort of phrasing and so on. We've got the denote and the connote. So when an interpreter chooses words, and I'm sure you've seen it when you know what someone said, but the interpreter's used a sign that is close but not quite, and it does convey quite a different meaning. Or I've seen people, use sign language, and I know what they're trying to say because I can follow these signs, but the interpreter sees something a little bit different, and it's taken away kind of the emphasis or the vibe of whatever conversation they're trying to have. And I just think, like, there's a lot to do with expression, isn't there, as well? Like, language isn't just words, but you can get a lot from a sign as expression, but then if the interpreter just uses like a gentler word, it can really change the messaging. And I just wonder about that with our students and how important it is that we do become fluent signers ourselves, because then hopefully that language goes straight from us as teachers to our deaf students.
Mm.
Laura,
And
did
as you say, it's probably not just all about using words, but using our face, our body language.
mm,
Mm.
Laura, did you find anything extra that you wanted to add on that one?
Um, I liked, or there was a part of it that relates back to um the last compass point about Te Reo Māori, and
Mhm.
that you talk about deficit language if you're talking about a student, how you might be talking about that student to another colleague is, um, you could say, oh, he's so attention seeking,
Mm.
but you could say he shows enthusiasm.
Mm.
And it
Yes.
relates back to the learning Te Reo Māori of the words that they use for ADHD and autism. And for
Mm.
ADHD, they use, I can't remember the word, but it means attention in many places. And then autism means learning in their own space and time. And because when you say, oh, that child has ADHD,
Mm.
there's already deficit and disorder in
Mm.
that title. And so you're already putting negative connotations on that child when we could have positive languages towards that child.
Yeah, you're
Um,
so right. Because Amy was just saying this in her presentation to the outreach leaders. She's got a real thing about the word language deprivation, because she thinks deprivation implies that people have purposefully or willingly, intently deprived a child from language,
mm,
which very few of our families have done that intentionally.
Mm.
And then she uses another phrase, which I just don't have written down beside me, but basically saying not they haven't had enough access to language. It was like, not enough access to language, which is a much better way of phrasing it, or a kinder way of phrasing it.
Yeah.
Because
mm,
deprivation sounds like, you've been deprived. They have been deprived, but it just sounds intentional.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Um, what else did I talk about? They did talk about, with that negative language, and especially with deaf people, prior they would call them deaf and dumb because they couldn't talk, and because sign language was, seen as an inferior language. So they've come such a long way.
Mm.
Mm.
And so for me as a teacher to the deaf and hard of hearing students, it's hard because I'm not deaf myself, but I want to teach them skills so that if there are obstacles, they know how to advocate for themselves, or they know how to work around them, and that being deaf and using sign language is actually really special and powerful, and it shouldn't hold you back, and
Mm.
that it's such a beautiful language
Mm.
that I think everyone should use it.
Yeah, I agree, because it's knowing that it's a language in itself with its own grammar. And I had the conversation over the weekend with my family, who I thought I'd explained this before, but clearly hadn't. But they were watching interpreters on the TV for news and whatnot, and they didn't realize that the facial expressions were the grammar. And
Mm,
I'm sure I told them that before, but anyway, they hadn't clicked. And then I was trying to give examples of the WH and the rhetorical questions and the yes no questions and the positioning and how you can change with your body and classifiers and stuff. And it's just like this huge light bulb moment
Mm.
for them. And I don't know about you, but I still get the same question about NZSL, and people have said, why is there different sign languages from country to country? Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't this just be a great opportunity that everyone can just use the same sign language? And
Yeah.
I used to think that too, which I'm so embarrassed about now. I used
Mm.
to think that before I learned sign language.
Yeah.
It's like, why, well, we can all speak, so why don't we all just have the same?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Why
I
don't we
often,
just all speak
that's my
English?
reply often. I say, well, why don't we all speak one international language? Why don't we all speak English?
Mm,
Why is there French and German and Italian and Spanish and Samoan? And so it's just, I just say it's the same with sign language.
Yeah,
Why
it's
should they
culture.
all be?
Language is culture. Culture's
It
languages.
is.
mm,
It
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
very cool. Okay,
Mm.
Laura, do you want to jump into another? Unless you've got something else you want to add on this, or do you want me to jump into the bias one?
Hmm.
And then you can pull up your notes for the other one. Okay, so I read about privilege, bias, and microaggressions. Firstly, the first thing that we did was listen to a story about single stories, which she never mentioned privilege the whole time. And there's nothing about privilege. But I think what it was trying to say is if you're the dominant culture in a setting, then that story is the main story in that perspective that stories are told. Therefore, it's privilege. But it was just interesting that the title was privilege and then you actually talked about it. But basically, the lady was talking about when you hear a story or a message over and over, it kind of becomes a truth. And it's a lot of the international unrest at the moment. Like if you look at the media and so on, and we're getting one story of Iran or one story of Israel, and it becomes what we believe to be truth.
Mm,
And I thought about that with our deaf students or culture, that there's this story of their deaf culture, which is over and over and over, and that becomes the truth. And I'm thinking, is it actually the truth? So, deaf, they love sport, they like telling jokes, they like storytelling. Do they all though? That's one story. Yes, some deaf people, but not all. And it becomes like we have this understanding, oh, if we know about deaf culture, we'll understand these 4 or 5 things. But I'd hate for, people to go, oh, New Zealanders, they all like rugby, they all like to drink beer or, whatever it is. Because
Mm.
that's not true.
mm,
It's some, but not all. And I'm thinking like who's telling those stories and where did they come from? Because that's my questioning one, my number two. Like, is there research of our deaf students now, like let's say the students in the last 10 years or even 5 years that have grown up with like kids of Korero Lane and all these deaf role models, the books that we do on all our resources that we have that we share. Um, is it this negative, you can't learn, you can't participate, we're stripping your language away from you. That's not the truth. That's how it was in the past.
Mm.
There was this trauma and this terribleness and unfairness and so on, the way that they were treated. That's
Mm.
true. And that becomes like this intergenerational trauma, which is the whole other thing. But what about our students that we have now that have these positive role models? And that, I don't know, I just feel like we have to be careful to not keep telling the same story.
Mm.
So that was my learning from that one. And then the second part was this implicit bias. So that means like a bias you have subconsciously without you realizing.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, I think that we as teachers have implicit bias around achievement of deaf students because the surveys that we've done indicate that our students are often bored and they find the work too easy.
Mm.
So that was last year's survey that Trevor did. Um, are we challenging them enough? Or do we have high enough expectations of our students? Because we might have this unconscious belief or bias that they're not going to succeed as well as they could. I don't know. It's hard to put it in words. But how do we change? That's the key. It's like you have to acknowledge it, but then how do you change this? And they were saying that you don't shame someone for thinking negative thoughts about anyone, but
Mm.
actually it's almost like a acknowledgement that it's just a thing or a mistake and you can learn from it, like it, find out about yourself, learn from it, and then change. But don't feel bad that you've got this bias because you don't actually know where it's come from, but it's
Mm,
probably come from that one story that we've been told over and over about whatever it is. So that's why I suppose they started with the story business and then moved to the unconscious bias that we need to change the story and then we'll change the bias.
mm,
So that was interesting. And that's when I did that implicit association test, which is actually quite fun to do if you've got a spare 10 minutes. Um, and then it moved into microaggressions, which
mm,
is basically small, incidental little ways of talking or doing that you don't intend to hurt anybody, but you kind of do. It's like when you say, oh, that must be an Asian driver, when someone pulls out in front of you.
mm,
Um, you're not really, well, that is quite racist, but it's like little snubs and little, like, I'm only going to ask or assume, like, they gave one example when you ask an Asian child, oh, which maths are you going to do it?
mm,
Or are you going to do the sciences? Because you assume because they're Asian, they're good at maths and science, that kind of thing.
mm,
So it's
mm,
like those reinforcing those stereotypes. And
mm,
again, that came back to my thing that I started with the deaf. What are our small little things that we think and say over and over that reinforce this one story?
mm,
Um, I just I did find the whole thing quite interesting actually.
mm.
And the trick is how do we address these things because you kind of have to rip the band-aid off first and
Yeah.
acknowledge that there is an issue.
Mm,
Is there an issue? But that also comes back to us being autists. We're hearing. So
mm,
whose story is it to tell? It's not ours.
mm,
Whose job is it to ask the questions? I don't even know if it's ours because we should all the power should go to the people who are of that minority group, which in this case is deaf.
mm.
So have no solutions, lots of questions. Laura, do you remember doing this one?
No.
You did it first though, I think, didn't you?
No, I only did learn
Oh,
NZSL in Language Matters.
oh, did you not do the bias one?
No.
Oh well, there you go. You don't- That's it
Done.
in a nutshell. It's interesting though. I found it really interesting.
I plan to do that one. Yeah. I
Yeah.
looked at one, the module on poverty and disability. I
Oh yeah.
looked at that, but I just felt it wasn't for me to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Laura,
Yeah.
have you got any that you want to talk about?
Um, with my learn NZSL one,
Yeah.
my wondering that I've had, um, and I've been wondering it for a while, is so um so in my previous classes, well no, there was a video and the dad is fluent in sign language. He's a coder, so he
Yes, I saw
teaches
that. Yeah.
sign to his students, and so that way, um, the students and his daughter they can all communicate with each other. And I've had in my previous classes, I've had non-verbal students. And so when you have non-verbal students, you get the core board. And the core board's great, but I also taught sign to my non-verbal students. And so they were able to sign emotions, especially. And then they knew the basic classroom, like stand up, sit down, blah, blah, blah. Um, and so if the non-verbal students were dysregulated and, if something's happened and they're very emotional, instead of using the core board, because the core board, you have to sit down and find which feeling am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling that one. The non-verbal students aren't in the right mind frame to do that. And
Mm,
so they were able to come up to me and go sad, like at that moment, or angry at that moment. And so we were able to deal with it straight away. So my wondering, and in a perfect world, I would like this to happen, is if you have a nonverbal child and you get taught the core board, why are we not backing it up with NZSL as well?
Mm.
Because
Yes.
then I talked to um, the teacher involved, or the specialist teacher involved, who was teaching me the core board, teaching me the iPad core board. And then I told her, like, well, I'm also teaching them sign language. And she's like, wow, that's amazing. And I
Mm.
would tell them what our students are doing, and she's just amazed. She's like, wow. And the progress was just, it just kept going and going and going.
Mm.
And then it helped their emotions, it helped regulate them, it helped even starting to learn words and reading.
Mm.
And she was like, that's amazing.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah. Why do
right.
more people not do that?
Yeah,
So,
it seemed like such an obvious
yes.
thing for me to start doing. No one told me that I had to do it. It just seemed so natural to start doing it.
Mm.
So why isn't it a thing?
Because there was that wee girl in the video, not Ruby, but her friend, or another wee girl, who's, I don't know if she was deaf or not, but she was definitely signing. And he mentioned in there something about the nonverbal. And it should be the default. It's a, a language of our country. If
Mm.
we were teaching it as much as we were Māori, then all the kids would have a basic understanding of
Mm.
emotions and colours and all the rest of it. But then
And it
those
even worked,
non-verbal,
and it even worked with all of my ESOL students
Mm.
yes.
because my old class, majority of them were ESOL. They
Mm.
didn't have to know English for me to go, get your book. It's writing time. Sit down, stand up. And then, so they're not always lost. They see me doing it,
Mm.
and then they can learn the school routines, and
Mm.
then they can learn the English that comes behind it. But
Mm.
yeah,
Well, it's a visual thing. If you say stand up, I mean,
Mm.
they will hear stand up and see that's what it is. And over time, they'll, you know, learn as well. I just don't understand why we don't do in
Mm.
that mainstream, teacher prep classes and so on,
Mm.
make these
And I
Canadian
struggled in my
teachers to learn.
last, I often struggled in my last school because it was about 70% ESOL, and I did have a few children there with autism, and they were non-verbal. And I'd have children come to school from maybe India or the Philippines with no English, and I just used to think, what do I do? I just hope that they are sponges and they soak up the English. It never did it cross my mind. Hey, sign language, that's going to work.
Mm,
Um, yeah.
yeah, I
And
know.
I was trying to teach them Te at the same time, and I thought, well, sign language is going to back up both Te and English. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's goes back to the other module that we did around UDL, isn't it?
Mm,
What's good for deaf is good for all.
yes. And it is good for all because it's so visual, and children, young learners, they love visual. They love moving and movement and
Mm,
facial expressions and visual and pictures
mm,
and so on.
yeah.
mm. Very good. Anyone else want to add?
No.
No.
Okay, I'll stop